in so many different venues. And it would probably just embarrass him if I went down the long list. I think you've all been able to read it on the website that we have, where you can go to his website as well. But he was really the person who was considered one of the early Mr. Shark videographers, and has won at least one Emmy I know of, maybe more. But he's just a great guy and knows so much about underwater photography. And the nice thing is, he was just always dedicated to helping each and every person who showed a hair of interest in getting better at what they do. So I'm very appreciative, and I'm thrilled that Marty's here to share some of his great experiences and insights with us, some of whom I know are underwater photographers or wanna be, or just enjoy it. But I think without further ado, I'll just say, Marty, welcome to our small but powerful group here on the coast of Georgia. And thanks for showing up.
And Jim, I'll say thank you. I thought it was a little cold of you to say that somebody's showing a hair of interest. That seemed like an unnecessary Squires-like jab to me. And you forgot to tell him I made my Little League All-Star team when I was 11. But other than that, I think you covered me. So first of all, I'll just say thank you to everybody. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen. I think that'd be the easiest thing to do. And let's see if this will work okay. And just, Jenny, if you can give me a thumbs up that we've got, that you're seeing, that you're seeing my screen. Okay. Can you just give me a thumbs up? Yeah. Okay, good. So I just want to say thank you to you guys for having me. This is the first time, obviously, I've spoken to your group. And I especially want to thank and acknowledge, Squire Jim Squires and Jenny Worthington for kind of helping set this up. And Jenny, you know, I've done this sort of thing, and I've been involved in a lot of photographic clubs, and the people that do the volunteer work get a lot of blame, never get enough credit. And so thank you guys for putting in the extra time that got us to today. What I want to do, and I will stop and ask for questions. I don't want to just be talking to my computer screen for 40 minutes. It's boring, and I've seen all these pictures. But what I want to do is just kind of just share what I was asked to do and want to do is just kind of talk about what makes underwater a little bit different. What are some of the challenges different than shooting pictures on land? So I just thought I'd start by just kind of just sharing some of the images, just a variety of images from big animals to seascapes. Some of you may be very familiar with the marine environment. These are animals that you're looking at here. The yellow thing is a crinoid. People might think of it as being a plant the first time they see it, but it's closely related to sea stars. And on the right, all the orange and red are soft corals. So corals are animals, and you've probably read about corals a lot in the last few years because of ocean acidification and the problem that they have. I also shoot and love to shoot animal behavior. This is a little orange banded pipefish. It's a fish that's 8 or 10 inches long. It's a male, and he's got the fertilized eggs are glued to his belly. So he is referred to as a Mr. Mom affectionately in the underwater community. So I'm just going to share a little variety to get us started here. This is the world's largest fish. If you've been around the Atlanta Aquarium, you may have seen it. It's a whale shark. They'll get to 40 feet long would be very large. They get slightly larger than that. And you can get an idea of kind of what their size may be compared to a diver. These particular photographs were shot off the coast of Mexico's Yucatan at an island called Isla Mujeres, north of Cozumel. So as Jim mentioned earlier, I have been working at this thing a long time. I did have hair when I started. And this is the point I'm making here. This is an old film scan. This is an image of a southern right whale that was shot a little over 31 years ago. My 40th birthday was spent in Patagonia working on a film called Dolphins, Whales, and Us that aired on CBS. And so this is, I guess what I'm really trying to say is I've been at this thing for quite a while, 45 years, I think, something like that. You quit counting after a while. somewhere north of 15,000 dives. So I've spent a lot of time in the water, and I would say that if I had 15,000 dives in the water, about 14,999 of them, I had a camera of some kind in my hand. So the images of the whales with film, as some of you might know, were shot with a camera called a Nikon camera. This is the camera that kind of came from the Jacques Cousteau line. It's an amphibious camera that is really made to go underwater. It's a rangefinder camera, and you guesstimate your distance and your focus. Your little viewfinder is, I think you can see my cursor. Jenny, can you see my cursor? Thumbs up on the screen. Can you see me wiggling around? Yeah. So that was a little viewfinder, or you could put an auxiliary viewfinder up on top of the camera, and you kind of said, hey, I think I'm going to get 5 feet away from my subject. And you set the thing on 5 feet, and then there's an f-stop. You can change your aperture down here with this knob. So it's a bit of a guesstimator camera, but it was the Cadillac of cameras when I first started. Today, you can take any camera that anybody owns, I'm guessing in this group, and you put it inside of a box or a housing. And we would refer to it as a camera housing, but cameras from Nikon's, Canon, Olympus, Sony, whatever. There are still some amphibious cameras that are made, but most cameras that go underwater to any depth are housed. Some people even, I would say, are foolish enough to put their smartphone in a housing. But if you take it in the ocean, there is definitely a risk involved. Water wins. Water is going to beat everybody. The name of the game as far as flooding equipment, when I say water will beat everybody, just a little bit of water and electronics is a real problem for any underwater photographer. So we'll get a little bit more into some of that as we go along. So the thing that I have really enjoyed, I'm an animal geek. Underwater is a specialty, and you'd probably think of it that way, but within the specialty, there are other specialties. There are people that concentrate on wrecks, or people that shoot divers more. I've always just been an animal person. And so behavioral sequences like this, like I'm getting ready to present here, are the stuff that I love to shoot. This little fish is called a sling jaw wrasse. It's maybe 12 inches long. This is a female. Wrasses are mostly known because they change sex in the middle of their lives. And there are a bunch of fish that do that. But this particular wrasse is called a sling jaw. And when it feeds, you'll see it extend its jaw. It has a protrusible jaw. It's not connected to its chin, if you will, the way yours and mine are. So it extends that jaw, and it forms it into like a straw where it sucks in its prey. It happens pretty quickly, and I had looked for this sequence in this shot, tried to shoot it for years, and I finally found the fish. But I tried more times than I can possibly count before I was able to capture this sequence. Here's another kind of behavioral shot the sort of thing that I love to shoot. This is the fish here are called Garibaldi. They are a California state marine fish. If it means anything to anybody, they're a type of damselfish. They're 10 inches long, perhaps, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 10 to 14 inches. These are adults, and it's probably two males that are vying over turf. Pair of poison ocelot octopus that are mating. You've probably heard at some point of blue ring octopus that's people see in Australia sometimes. These are more venomous, and they are mating here. This is a male who has a specialized arm that he delivers a packet of sperm to the female that she puts in her mantle, which is this kind of sac-like organ here, and then she can then fertilize whatever eggs. Certainly not everybody mates that way. This is a pair of yellowtail hamlet. They're a Caribbean fish, and they are spawning. You'll see it if you go to look for this in the right places. You'll see it almost every evening. behavior is not confined to small animals. This is a manta ray that's being mobbed by a group of clarion angelfish that they rid host animals like this manta ray of ectoparasites and dead tissue, bacteria, algae, whatever might have accumulated on the skin of the host manta ray. So that's kind of what I do underwater. I do shoot on land a little bit, but usually what I'm shooting at's got a fin in it or gills in it somewhere. And but most of the things that I do are underwater. I have gotten into photographing birds some in recent years. So, but clearly my expertise in terms of photography is certainly not shooting weddings or food or architectural work. I am a real specialist. And it's just kind of the way I've figured out how to make my living. So when we take a camera underwater, a DSLR or a mirrorless camera underwater, we put it in some kind of a box or housing that looks like what's pictured here. There's lots of different kinds. This particular one is a polycarbonate housing. It's kind of like a Lexan or a plastic. And it doesn't show up as clearly as I might like it to, but all these little buttons here let you get to the controls that are on the back of the camera. The whole idea when you put a camera in a housing, this is another one, this is cast aluminum, but the whole idea when you put a camera in a housing is that you can manipulate all the controls on the camera just like you could if you were shooting on land, and the camera should never know that it went underwater. So the idea of the housing is to keep the system dry and allow you to manipulate every control. So if you were to look at it, this particular housing is made by a company in Austria. They're specifically made for a model of camera, because the buttons on cameras are all in a little bit different place. The cameras are a little bit different size. And so that's a challenge for manufacturers in our world. But a knob like this, where his fingers are, it connects through the housing in a way that will allow the housing to stay dry, that allows you to manipulate the wheel, or in this case, the wheel on the back of a camera, which would change my aperture. This finger up here will change a shutter speed. And you might see this big block back here. And I think I think you could probably see my face in the side of your screen somewhere, but you can imagine when you take pictures on land, you hold the camera right up to your eyeball. When you get underwater, you put it in a housing, and then you put a diving mask on and you back up. And we need to have, especially the more birthdays you've had, you want to have some kind of an auxiliary viewfinder. So this is a real piece of optics here that goes on the back of the housing. I think this particular one, it costs about $1,200. There are some that may be $800, but it's a big deal so that you can see a larger image than you might if you had to back your eye up away from the camera and see in it's just darker underwater than it is on land. So that's kind of what we run into. And all these little buttons, again, all these buttons up here let you autofocus, delete, enlarge a picture, look at a histogram, whatever it is that you want to do that you would do on land. And one of the challenges for us is to learn to kind of play this thing like a piano, where you don't have to look at all the verbiage underwater. You want to just be able to get familiar enough. So you spend some time on your couch, you got to practice with this stuff. And then here you can see the size of that optical viewfinder, and somebody putting a mask on, how you kind of are forced to back away from a little image that's in here somewhere. So this is what the system might look like looking at the other side of the housing. In the front, there's a port, and you can see the lens inside. When we're underwater, this is one setup, but it's kind of prototypical how a camera system might look underwater. And this is the housing here. And we have typically, not always, but we dive with strobes. It's the same as a topside flash. We've just always used the term strobe. These particular ones are made by a company or distributed by a company in Indianapolis They've got a diffuser on them, but we are limited. We need to take light with us most of the time, not all the time underwater. And we get limited as to how many frames a second we can take based on how fast can the strobe recycle so that it can shoot again. And they'll typically a second or a little more is about what you want your strobes to be, just kind of what the technology allows. You can vary the power, and these have the little white cap on the front is a diffuser, which either spreads the beam, which costs you light, but gives you more even lighting, or narrow the beam depending on the lens that you might be using. So another of the little challenges we face underwater is this is the strobe and this is the camera housing. And the system has to be able to communicate electronically so that when you trip the shutter, the strobe goes off at the right time. And so there's a PC cord in the top of the hot shoe and the camera on the inside of the housing, and then this cord. And in this little cord, you've got 5 copper wires. And this little cord is thin, and those little cords, if you own them, you feel like they'll break if you sneeze at them, but it's not really true. You just have to be careful how you handle these things, because it's kind of one of the weak links in our system. This is an electronic sync cord or synchronization cord. We also have systems that use fiber optic cables. But as a rule, we don't want our flash or our strobe to be right next to the lens. We want to take our strobes or flashes and move them up above our subjects and out to the side, and we need a way to electronically make that happen. Whoops. Oh, and so I got ahead of myself here. Sorry. Here we go. So that's the thing that we're all trying to avoid underwater. That is ocean water being poured out of the back of someone's strobe. And that is a $1,000 mistake. And it's one of the risks that we have underwater. Everybody knows it going in. The ocean's going to beat you at some point in your life. Your goal is to put it off as long as you possibly can. And when it's your turn in the barrel, not make everybody else around you miserable. But it's going to happen. And I guess the other rule is when it happens to somebody is give them a little space, because when I started years ago, there were some bad designs. I started doing all this stuff in the 1970s. This is now my second time through the 70s, and the manufacturing process is so much better, but this stuff still happens. The ocean is going to get everybody. So we have to be extremely careful and disciplined and develop routines when we put the systems, put the cameras and the lenses and so forth in our housings. They are O-ring sealed. O-rings are like gaskets. You've got them in your house under, in the sink, in any place there's water that you don't want to just go spraying out over everywhere. You've got to have some kind of a seal that's a rubber seal. In our case, we use these O-rings. They go in a certain groove. They sit against a surface, and they need to be clean when you assemble your system. And it's not that you don't get away with saying, I cleaned it really good yesterday. Do I have to clean it today? You need to make sure every time you get in the water, you don't have to pull them apart, but you want to make sure that you look at O-rings and there's not grit. You don't have to look for microscopic things, but hair or sand or a piece of shell or anything it's not might cause a leak, it is will cause a leak. And so we have to be really careful of that. Where are we? Yeah, so there's the O-ring. You can see it going in a little groove there in the back of the housing. And it's just, underwater is different in this way. We use certain silicone grease to keep the O-ring supple. The grease does not make the seal, but it helps keep the O-ring from getting brittle and cracked, which leads to leaks. And then in recent years, what we've started to do, you can see there's a little pump in my hand here, and there's a little valve and a gauge, and we suck a vacuum out of the housing, and this little gauge will register, and if it holds pressure for 10 or 15 minutes or overnight, if you come back and it's held its pressure, like you pump it up to it's in whatever the units that mercury is in, can't think of what it is right now, but mega somethings. But it's held its pressure, and I can be confident that this system, the integrity of the seals is good, and I can be confident that I can take this thing in the water. And these gauges have been a real game changer for us in a lot of ways. So now I've kind of told you a little bit about the setup and the gear. Let's get underwater. And just the fact that we're shooting in water, what makes my life really different underwater? And the first thing is that water, no matter whether it is fresh water or salt water, is a selective filter and of the visible spectrum of light. If you take something that is bright red on the surface and you take it underwater, by the time it is between 15 and 20 feet, that red is really muted. Your brain will go, oh, wait. I saw that thing was red on the surface, and your brain might try to make it red. But if you didn't see it on the surface and you swim up to it underwater, at 15 feet, that red is gone. That red end of the spectrum has been absorbed. Oranges will kind of last a bit deeper, down to about 30 feet. Yellows, 60 feet. Greens, a little deeper. But by the time we are 80 to 100 feet, the underwater world is blue on blue. And it's kind of a monochromatic blue on blue. It's hard to get contrast in images, and it's hard to get colors. When we use strobes put out light that we try to match sunlight. So it's equal amounts of red, green, and blue, but we have to get our lights really, really close to subjects, because if you shoot from, say, 10 feet away from your subject, light goes from your strobe out 10 feet to your subject, comes back 10 feet to your camera, and it's like being 20 feet deep in the water. So every time we can get just a little bit closer underwater, it really, really matters. So that's kind of what the system might look like underwater. This is Jim, this is Dave Fleetum, who's one of the guys that you know and hung out with. I'm in constant touch with Dave. So another thing about water is, when you look at this, it looks like it's a very inviting blue water. We would say, let's fly halfway around the world to go see blue water like this. Maybe you could drive from Georgia to go to Florida or go to Cozumel or Fiji or wherever, Hawaii. The fact is, we do that to go see underwater visibility that's 100 feet. And we think that's phenomenal. 200 feet is just off the scale. But if you are in an airplane and you're sitting on the tarmac and visibility is only 100 feet, you're going to be sitting on that tarmac a long time. 100-foot visibility is really limited. And it's limited because there's junk in the water. Some of it's alive, some of it is just bits of, there's lots of planktonic organisms, but just anything that's blown in to the water, or animals that have shed skin, whatever it is, there is stuff in the water. And that stuff will show up in underwater pictures like this. This is a picture I borrowed from old Jim Squires. He doesn't know that, but it's not true, Jim. It's got what we call backscatter in the picture. And this is one of the kind of the bane of underwater photographers. All this junk in the water is something we try to go to great pains to avoid. And you can minimize it, but you can't make it disappear. You can minimize it by your techniques and by the placement of strobes. I think you can see my hand, but underwater, if you take a light, somebody have a question? No, okay. If you take a light and you put it right next to the lens, the light goes straight out to hit your subject, but it lights up all the particulate between you and your subject. And a lot of times that particulate's out of focus, and it shows up as just this horrible junk in the water. You'll sometimes hear underwater photographers say there's a lot of backscatter in the water. That's really not quite true. There's a lot of particulate in the water, but by the way we deal with that particulate, we convert it into backscatter. So you try by lighting the position of your lights to minimize it. Nobody can really avoid it. But in the same scenario here, you can make photographs like this without all that junk in the picture by using proper techniques. And I promise you, it takes practice. The one thing about underwater and photography anywhere, it's like anything else, it's a skill, and you can't read it all out of the manual and get it right. It's like riding a bicycle. You're gonna have to go out there and skin your knees a little bit. So again, while we take strobes and put them away from our lens is to minimize backscatter. We typically place 1 or 2 strobes, in this case, above our subject so that any shadows that get created will be cast downward, which is the way we're used to looking at shadows on land. And it just helps us get oriented to our photographs. One last thing about gear is that my guess is everybody that I'm talking to is at one time or another picked up a camera and it had a lens cap on it. And you thought, oh, silly me. And you reach around the front of the lens and you pull it off and you go on about your shot. If we do that underwater, we have cost ourselves a dive. So the point is that underwater, there's just more equipment prep, and you've got to be careful. When you put that camera in the housing, the brochure will tell you everything lines up and it works perfectly and by our system. Every underwater photographer that's done this more than 2 days knows you better test all those little controls. You become a little bit of a mechanic, little adjustments in your housings. I travel with a little toolkit, but there's Allen screws and all kinds of things that you need to line up, and we're constantly messing with our gear, trying to make it work the best it can. But a mistake like this, you just really got to check yourself. Seriously, if somebody did this, found a lens cap on, they've got to go back to the surface. But to do that, you can't go right away. You have to make what we call a safety stop. So you got to hang out for at least 3 minutes and maybe longer at a depth of 10 or 15 feet. Then you got to go back to the boat, get on the boat, rinse your camera gear in fresh water, dry it off, get out of your gear, at least down to your waist, dry yourself off a little bit so you can get in, open the housing. In my case, I'd have to bleed the pressure, get back in there. So you cost yourself a lot of time is the point of that. And that's sort of some of the things that we're trying to just make shooting underwater a little bit different. So I'm going to stop my share, and I've kind of gotten through some of the equipment part of this. If anybody has any questions at this point, please ask, and if you don't, somebody make one up so I don't feel like I'm just talking to my computer. Anybody got a question here?
So I'll throw a question out. If
All
somebody's
right.
not done.
Who is that? Just identify yourself if you would. I can't.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's a room full of us. It's Mark.
Okay, Mark. All righty. Go ahead.
So if somebody's just getting started, they want to get some images while they could be snorkeling, diving, whatever. What would you recommend they start out with?
Here's what I would tell you. When you first start out something that you can afford to flood and keep smiling. And that's just the honest truth. There's a learning curve to underwater. It's better and better and better now. And I would not be the person. It's not. I would go to a camera. There are specialty stores that deal with underwater. They know the latest models, the latest the housings, the cameras, the compatibility. It's not the world I deal with all the time. So, but there are companies. There's 5 or 6 companies around the country that have systems like that people order from. So typically I may buy some cameras and lenses from the camera store down the street. But if I buy anything specialized for underwater, I go to some of these companies. Was it you that had the TG6?
Yeah.
So I would have said, 2 years ago, that was the hottest item. But it's like everything, it's like everything else. Nothing lasts at the top of the heap. If you buy the camera that's the latest, greatest, I just bought a Canon R5 is what I'm shooting. Hope I'll be in the process of housing. But it's the latest, greatest thing, but it won't be in 6 weeks. So I'm not trying to win the cocktail party conversation, but you want something simple. And depending on your knowledge of photography, if you understand things like shutter priority or aperture priority or what depth of field is, you can get a little more sophisticated system. If not, you get some kind of a point and shoot and show pictures to your mother. And that's just kind of the difference. Anybody else? Is everybody just being polite, or are we connecting here?
I have a question. So at what, and I guess it depends on what kind of waters you're photographing in, the clarity, but at what depth do you really need strobes? Say if you're diving in the Caribbean, you probably get away with it for a few feet, maybe 20 feet more.
Well, get away with and making photographs are different terms.
Okay.
So
really
if I said to you in the forest on land, what can you get away with? And darkness is part of it. The whole thing, you got to get close no matter what. But it also depends on if it's a sunny day and you got the sun over your shoulder. So when I'm photographing, I'll get to it in a little bit, but photographing whales, for example, you can't light them with a strobe. You can light their face, but you can't light their face in anything much beyond their head. So you've got to get this in a position where the sun helps you light that subject. So photographing whales at 100 feet deep is laughable. People do it so they can show proof and say, I saw so-and-so, but that's just not that. Those are not images that are going to appear anywhere other than your own slideshow. But in a Caribbean water on a sunny day with the sun over your shoulder, early morning, late afternoon, whatever, you can be 20 feet deep and get some shots. So I hope that answers it, or I hope I danced around it, Will. I'll take one more and then get back to it. I might have, if there is one more. Jim Squires, don't you be pretending you know all this stuff now. Come on, help me out. All right, I'm gonna get back to sharing my screen here.
I'm trying not to embarrass myself.
Well, you brought me here. You've already embarrassed yourself, so let's see how we go. One of the things I've done just during COVID, one of the ways I kind of tried to make myself useful or stay connected to diving when I couldn't get on an airplane is I have written a new ebook. It's just been published. It's called 101 Tips for Underwater Photographers. And I thought I would just share some of those tips because they are the kinds of things you would want to say to any underwater photographer. The intent of the book is really for people that got stuck in COVID or that don't get to dive as often as I do, to kind of flip through a book like this before the next time they're getting in the water, just to kind of get their head back in the game so that they can have those thoughts in front of a dive instead of behind them. So here's the kind of one of the tips. When you think you're close to your subject, get closer. When you've done that, get even closer. Close matters underwater. And you can see a little explanation when you see, and I'll show you kind of a difference in photographing animals on land and underwater. But what happens underwater, if you're too far away, this is shot in the Caribbean at probably a depth of about 35 or 40 feet. But you can see how this Caribbean reef shark, now my mom might think that's a great photograph. My editors would not. And the reason is you can see that the white, here's how it's shot well. And you see the colors and the hues in this shark. This has got a lot of cyan in the underbelly. And it's because the strobe light didn't get there. This is all lit by sunlight. I may have been swimming around with a strobe, but I was too far away. And so I wasn't able to effectively light the animal. And that's one of the big differences. So what does close mean? Close is this kind of close. And this is a situation where you don't have to have a strobe because of the sunny day and relatively shallow and in very shallow water. Zoom with your fins and not your lens. When I first started in underwater photography, a zoom lens was thought of as a poor man's lens. And now almost everybody that I know has zoom lenses in their arsenal, if you will. But the idea underwater is you can't use the telephoto end of a zoom and make a subject that's 25 or 30 feet away. You can fill the frame, but you can't photograph it well. You have got to get close to your subject. Close, I'm rarely more than 8 feet away, and I hate being that far away from anything I shoot. It's not a silhouette or a big animal up near the surface. So the idea with zoom lenses is to get as close as you can and use the zoom for composition. The idea being that if you make an image like this on land or like this on land, you're shooting out of a Humvee or whatever in Africa. Underwater, it's just a big difference. It's just the nature of it. Is when we make photographs like this, we're close. So all of these photographs of a gray reef shark or an American crocodile, this is probably shot from 4 or 5 feet away. This photograph from maybe 1.5 feet away. And it's just, that's what you have to do, with the exception, this is a great white shark. It was shot from inside of a cage, a shark cage, but the others are absolutely not. So this great hammerhead shark is shot on the bottom in Bimini. It's in about 35 feet of water, and there's certainly no cage. We just can't be that far away from subjects, and that greatly changes the game. This particular shark is called a blunt-nosed six-gill shark. It's about 14 or 15 feet long. It was shot at, I happen to know this, at 3:58 a.m. At about 55 feet of water and off the coast of Seattle. If I had surfaced, or when I did surface at the end of this dive, I think I could look into the headquarters of Starbucks. But it's this is, you got to use a strobe. Obviously, it's at night, and it's in pretty dirty water. But using the right technique, I was able to get this. This is the world's second largest shark. It's a basking shark. The photograph was captured in off the coast of Scotland a few summers ago. Like whale sharks, these guys are plankton feeders. You certainly don't use a strobe. One of the things about strobes I probably didn't mention, anytime you put something in the water in your hands, it creates drag. Anything, everything slows you down. We are the most awkward, clumsy animals ever to be in the ocean. We're just not hydrodynamically designed. And so for something like this, no way you're going to take a strobe with you. You can't keep up with these animals anyhow. What you learn to do is swim where they're going, not where they are, because we'll lose every race. So here's another of those tips, is to pull your face back from your camera's LCD screen to review an image instead of pushing the camera away from you and towards a subject. If anybody in the group maybe shoots insects or something that you're working really close to, you've probably learned that after you take a picture, you don't want to push your camera way forward because it spooks your subjects. And underwater, we're always trying to work so close to our subjects that we learn to take our pictures and then back our head up from our LCD screen. Being a good diver is the first thing you've got to do underwater. And a big part of that means being able to control your buoyancy, where you're not constantly rising and then you sinking and rising and sinking and kicking and splashing. You learn after a while in underwater, just by slightly inhaling or slightly exhaling, you can kind of ascend or descend a little bit. But minimal movements around animals is a big deal. So animals like this little mantis shrimp, it's a California mantis shrimp, or even bigger animals like this soup fin shark, when you're 6 feet away from an animal like this and you make a movement with your camera system, they flare. And they may not swim away, but they don't give you the angle you wanted, or you disrupt a behavior. And everybody in the underwater world at one time or another has wanted to capture a picture like this of a juvenile Garibaldi and ended up with another image that goes in their library of a fish butt. And it's just what happens. So you make a sudden movement and animals turn away from you. And we try to be really careful about that. One of the things that I see in underwater a lot is that people oversaturate pictures. I think that's kind of one of the to me, a problem in the digital era, is that all our photographs, or too many of our photographs, look like Las Vegas on Saturday night. I think Mother Nature is good enough if you just let Mother Nature do her thing. So pictures like this are natural. Pictures like the one on the bottom here just scream not real to me. And so we try to be careful about that. But goodness knows the underwater world is filled with just the most bizarre, colorful, captivating creatures. This is a little fish called an ornate ghost pipefish. It's 5 inches long, perhaps. This is a female. She's the larger. This is the coolest little fish. It's one of 9 species of pygmy seahorses. This little guy's less than an inch tall. So we spend a lot of time, like you did when you were a kid, crawling around in the dirt, although we're trying not to touch anything because everything lives somewhere. But as adults, we've kind of quit for the most part, crawling around in the grass and looking at bugs. But underwater, it's kind of, you get back to childhood in that way. And there's lots of really cool little bitty animals like this bug-eyed squat lobster. This thing's less than an inch. But how cool is Mother Nature? This particular animal is called a Spanish shawl. It's a nudibranch. Nudibranch meaning naked gills. It's a snail. It's closely related to snails, but it doesn't have a shell. So all these little orange things out here are part of its gills. Gets oxygen out of the water. These purple, kind of the V up here are chemosensory organs that are kind of like antenna. So that's what this system would look like. We would use what's called a flat port when we're shooting little bitty things. Works like a diving mask, and it makes objects look bigger and closer underwater so that we can fill a pleasing percentage of our frame with these little bitty subjects. So what lenses would I use? Typically a 50 or 60 or 100 or a 105 millimeter lens. That's kind of the range of macro lenses we might use behind a flat port, meaning this piece right here is going to be flat. If you use, we make wide angle pictures, the game gets weirder. So pictures like this, or like this of a sponge and a diver looking at a sponge, there's a difference that we put a curved port in front of the housing. So instead of it being flat, it's curved, and it completely changes the optics underwater. This curved port is called a corrected dome port. It eliminates that magnification, but it's also true that if I were to take this photograph and let's say I was 5 feet away, and I focus exactly on that sea line and then could open that housing and without hurting the camera, and I'd look, the lens is probably focused on about 12 or 13 inches. This dome port creates what's called a virtual image. And so I'm not really focused on the sea line. I'm focused on this, because this is curved, on an image that's out in front of the dome. And so the optics of that are all kind of weird. And we sometimes have to use diopters on our lenses so that the lens can focus close enough to focus on that virtual image. But the techniques are, the techniques are all the same. In shooting a photograph like this of an anemone, you can see the sun is in the background. I had to use a strobe to get the color to light this foreground subject, just like I might take a photograph like this. So the sun's behind my subject. To light this side of it, I needed to use a flash. The difference is underwater, or is on land, I could be 15 feet away, use a zoom lens perhaps, and get this kind of color. You can't do that underwater. And that's the difference. But the technique, as far as metering the background and trying to balance the lighting of your foreground and your background, it's exactly the same underwater. We also can use wide angle lenses. This was at night. These are Atlantic spotted dolphins shot on the edge of the Gulf Stream at about 1,200 at the surface, over about a 1,200 foot bottom at night. So it's the same game as just get close with a wide angle lens. This is a humpback whale. Again, this is just trying to make sunlight's what allows me to properly expose this image. You just can't do it with a strobe. They're just a much bigger animal than these dolphins. One thing we try to use to our advantage and we fight underwater is that we're often shooting upward, and shooting into the sun is kind of a weakness of digital technology. Where you might want the sun to look like that, in photographs underwater, it often looks like this. And that's just not real. And when you get something like that, it's very easy to blow out the highlights, to clip the sun. And so a lot of times what we do is try to put the sun on the edge of our frame. We get these magic beams underwater. It's just sunlight at the right angle, hitting all the particulate in the water. And it's kind of like walking through a forest in the mist sometimes. And it's you get this, you can take advantage of it. And we often either put the sun on the edge of our frame or try to block the sun. Here's again, it's just the magic rays. You don't always get it. We'll also get a lot of dappled sunlight on subjects that are very close to the surface. So anytime we're photographing big animals, the closer to the surface we can be, it's way, way to our advantage. This is a great white shark that just shot up in just a few feet of water. As soon as these are a pair of spinner dolphins at about probably 20 feet of water, and things start to go flat pretty quickly. No strobe, and certainly no magic beams and no dappled light. It all gets muted. And this is in the crystal clear waters off of Kona, Hawaii. Shooting into the sun is just the wrong angle. Digital, just the technology doesn't handle it very well. So that's the angle. And I'm always thinking when I get in the water to photograph big animals is to try to get the sun, especially in the early morning and late afternoon when I can, is to get the sun at my back. So Jenny, if you'll give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, are we doing okay time-wise still? We got a few more minutes here? Okay, all right. So for me, again, to kind of to get in where I'm going to try to wrap this thing up a little bit, but I've got some more images. The thing that I love to shoot is animal behavior. And we have a chance to do that underwater. You see a lot of pictures of these big, when you see advertisements to dive in Cozumel or go to Turks and Caicos or whatever, you see these wide angle shots that are trying to get people that are not really avid divers necessarily or photographers to come and enjoy the beautiful seascapes. But there's a lot of behavior. This is a little fish called a Gulf signal blenny from the Gulf of California, the Sea of Cortez. It's about 2.5, 3 inches tall. It's a nuptial male, so it's in its breeding season. This little guy is displaying, trying to kind of intimidate other males and to attract the ladies. This is a peacock mantis shrimp. It's got a clutch of eggs, and she carries the eggs until they hatch. So it's a way that she guards them. There are hundreds, obviously, of eggs, and this little mantis shrimp is probably 10 inches long, something like that. This is why I just have always enjoyed this picture. The fish on the bottom here is called a white spotted puffer. It's been feeding in the sand, and you can see that in kind of the mucky area. It's got this little mustache of goo from digging around in the bottom. And these little jacks are just waiting on that fish to uncover something so they can rush in and grab it. Nobody shares underwater. It's just kind of every man and woman for themselves. We see a lot of cleaning behavior. So this little shrimp is like the manta ray that was getting cleaned. This is getting little parasites and dead tissue and algae and fungus that's fungi, I guess, that's on the skin of this eel, including going right into its mouth and cleaning its teeth. The eel instinctively knows they'll go back to the same place called a cleaning station to get cleaned day after day after day. So they don't eat the cleaners. The cleaners serve them a long-term benefit. This is a fish called a blue streak cleaner wrasse that's doing kind of the same thing for a type of goatfish. I don't know how nature gets any cooler looking than this. This is a paddle flap scorpion fish. It's 10 inches long, maybe a foot long. I was photographing this guy one day. They sit and they, as colorful as it is, they blend amazingly well. And it's a lion weight predator that just waits on prey to get a little too close. And I just happened to see it jump up and grab this little damselfish. Take advantage of any opportunity. This is a fish called a brown-footed fish, a bird called a brown-footed booby that was just on the surface, just kind of staring down at me when I was surfacing one day. So you never know what you're going to see. We do dive a lot at night. You can take photographs at night. This is a great hammerhead shark. Yes, I had a pretty good idea that it was going to be around, that there were several around the boat, but we do it. One of the new frontiers in diving is to go into what we call black water, which means you go out offshore over a bottom that may be several hundred to several thousand feet deep and just jump in the middle of the night. And the greatest migration on Earth takes place every night. It is larval animals and other animals that live in the deeper ocean coming up towards the surface to feed at night. And we see a lot of animals out there in black water at night that we just don't see on the reef. These animals, this larval lobster has been drifting with plankton for some weeks. And when it gets to a certain size, if it's lucky, it will be over a bottom that it can settle down to that's the right habitat for it. Most of them don't make it, but that's a little larval lobster. Here's a little an Atlantic long-arm octopus that's about to settle to a reef. This was shot in Bonaire in the Caribbean. And I think here's a flatfish. I'm sure some of you are familiar with flounder and halibut fish that have both eyes on one side of their head. They don't in their larval stage, but as they start to transform into a settling animal that will go down to the bottom, one eye kind of migrates over and they end up with both eyes on one side of their head, as you would see now, would see here. So that black water stuff is just fascinating. Other behaviors, I think probably everybody is familiar to some degree with clownfish. We see them around anemones a lot. You'll see their eggs at the base of an anemone. And this is a little anemone fish that's probably one of the males that's guarding the eggs and keeping debris off of them. It's another type of anemone fish called a saddleback anemone fish that's also doing the same thing and protecting eggs. A lot of fish species, not incredible numbers, but there's a significant number that are called mouth brooders. This is a male, another of those Mr. Moms who cares for fertilized eggs by carrying them in his mouth until the young hatch. Usually takes about 5 to 7 days. These are freshly laid eggs, and you can tell that by the color because they haven't absorbed the yolk yet. And the cool thing, I don't know if anybody here is a birder, but one of the things in bird photography, in birding, I've always been taught is to try to look at every bird in the flock. You see a bunch of mallards sitting on the water. Don't just assume that all of them are mallards. Look, there may be a canvasback or some kind of a teal or another species of duck. And so in the water, that translates to, I'll see a little group, a school, or an aggregation of these ring-tailed cardinal fish. And what I'm doing is looking not for the fish that looks like this, but one that looks like it bit off a little more than it can chew, or that has the mumps. And if it's got fat cheeks like that, it's going to have eggs. And that's the male. These are about ready to hatch. And that's actually the same fish we looked at earlier. About 5 days later, they tend to hang out in the same place. And I was able to go back and work with this. This is another, these are spawning mandarin fish. I think they're just about as cool looking a fish, again, as you can get. These guys, we go out right around sunset almost every night. You've got a good chance to find, this is the male, is the larger fish, and the female. So my little book is available at wisedivers.com. That's my selfish plug. You can go to wisedivers.com, and I'm going to say thank you. And I'm going to go back and stop my share and take questions, I hope.
So Marty, what image has eluded you that you would love to take to put on your wall?
I'd like a 6-figure check. But animal wise, Jim, that's really interesting. I mean, sir, I have not dived polar waters. So a lot of animals that you might find in either pole, I'd love to go see. The truth is, I worked in the documentary world, as you know, for a long time, where you get paid to be on location. And I've had good opportunities as a still photographer. It's hard to name an animal I haven't seen underwater. Now, it doesn't mean I photographed it well, but it's hard to name an animal that people see. Animals that live deeper than that, you know, you're certainly not going to see on scuba. I've seen some things and been in submarines, but I certainly wouldn't claim to be an expert on deep water. There are certainly some squid that come up at night that are closely related to giant squid. I think that'd be something I'd like to an animal I'd like to see. But I really try not have expectations. I do like to go on expeditions where you target one species and kind of go all in. But that's a luxury of being in a profession. If you're going on a vacation, that's a tougher decision to make. You just kind of want to go diving. But and I guess I danced around it. I don't really know.
And are there any animals underwater that you would be particularly mindful about in terms of them presenting a danger, other than me as your buddy?
You as my buddy, or anybody as my buddy, would be number one, by far. And it's not to accuse you of this, but yeah, you don't want to dive with cowboys. You want to dive with people that take this thing seriously, safety wise. You know, there are certain animals. Yeah, I've been out in the water with like great white sharks outside of a cage. I don't want to do that tomorrow. I've done it. There are other species of sharks. Bull sharks are kind of they have 10,000 times more testosterone than any other known animal. And there are several species of sharks where the whole game is mellow, and just like somebody hits the light switch and the game changes. And yeah, that gets my attention. I think an African crocodile would get my attention, although people have done it. You know, and I've seen their work, and it's cool. I'm just not an expert and don't have
Can y'all still hear me?
the expertise. Was that a question? Anybody else? So I don't know I see Michaela, but I don't know everybody else's name. I want to know what your favorite animals are. Your favorite marine animals. Can you unmute your microphone and tell us?
Mine would be alligators.
Alligators. Okay. I've not photographed them underwater. I have certainly spent some time in the swamps of Louisiana photographing alligators. And would love to go back. That's some great country. Anybody else? There we
I
go.
love water butterflies.
What kind of butterfly?
Water butterflies.
I'm not sure that I've ever photographed or seen one of those, but I'm kind of I grew up really liking
I want
insects.
unicorns.
You want unicorns?
Unicorns. Jim, that's the animal I'd like to go photograph, which would be a narwhal, which they refer to as the unicorn whale, and it's something I've not seen. Thank you, ladies. Anybody else? I don't know if Jenny went away here. Did we lose Jenny for a minute? We might have. So my day's open. Anybody else got any more questions?
Beautiful photographs. I love it.
Thank you. If you can put that in the form of a question, but I appreciate the compliment. Thank you very much.
One question about you obviously know a lot about the different sea animals, and learning about the different species of birds and stuff like that is also very helpful. Have you studied any in the scientific study of ichthyology or anything of that nature?
You know, no, I would say this. I was a history major just barely. And I cut more classes in college than I attended. And but I am an avid reader. And luckily, 50 years ago when I started this thing, what you wanted to be was a good diver. Today, if you're going to do this, you'd need to be more educated formally than I would. It would give you a leg up. I would tell you this, that you get born with some talent and there's some things you can't do. Yeah, I'm not a horticulturalist, but if you and me fall off a boat, I just think some God-given ability, I have as good a chance of getting in front of a whale as anybody. There's a lot of people that take pictures of whale tails. And I don't think I did anything to develop that. I mean, I tried to, and I try to get better at it, but I think I had some kind of an ability to do that. I think I was comfortable around dogs and cats, probably too comfortable around snakes, that sort of thing. It's just, I was kind of an animal geek. And that was when I was coming along, that worked a lot to my advantage. And what really happened is I got in with a group of people in San Diego when I very first got into diving that started to explore open ocean. And what that means is just going 10 or 20 or 30 miles out in the middle of nowhere and seeing what you could find. When we figured out we couldn't find much doing that, we used a lot of bait. And nobody was doing it at that time. And that got us into the TV world. People caught on to that. And I didn't do it because I wanted to get on TV. I did it for the adventure, but realized that something good was happening in my life and continued on. And I used to have a business taking people out off the coast of California to see sharks. That we put them in a shark cage and we were outside the cage and baited animals up to the cage and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure I'd do that today, but it worked for me then. So it's just a different time. I would encourage anybody to go to college and go to class.
How would you like to see your images used by others?
Jim, in any way that promotes conservation, I think that, I'm part of the diving industry. And so promoting the sport, I'm all for it. But in the long term, whether our sport lives or doesn't live, it is not as important as whether we do whatever we can do to be good stewards of this place. So I think in any way that helps to create some awareness outside of the choir is the way I think that my images have the most value. That's a hard audience, harder audience to reach, but it is for everybody. Jenny, if you're here, and I'm not sure. Oh, okay, I don't see you. I'm going to say thank you. If anybody has any more questions, I'm happy to take them. I don't have anything I need to go do for a while, but I don't want to keep your gang longer than we're supposed to.
Anybody else have questions? Hey guys.
Well, in that case, I'll say thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. It was, I hope you guys did. I assume it was a little different for some of you. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Marty. It was great. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Can y'all hear me now? So for some reason, I've been kicked off like 3 times now. So I don't know if there's a problem with my Wi-Fi. Is Marty still with us?
He left.
Oh, well, I'll send him a thank you. I thought that was great. I'm interested in underwater stuff. So let's see what else I have here. Guys.
One thing, if I can just say is,
sure.
When you listen to somebody like Marty, you can appreciate, even if you never do